is Lore and Laughs, a podcast dedicated to lore Olympus and Greek mythology. In this episode, we're discussing the Run for Your Life multi-part chapters from 166 to 169.
Hi, I'm King Pluto. I'm also known as Greg.
And I'm Hekate, also known as Sarah.
Today we'll be discussing the Run for Your Life multi-part chapters from 166 to 169 non-Fast episodes. We'll be discussing Eros and Olympus, who is really Psyche, who go to the mortal realm to complete a task given by Aphrodite, where they see Artemis, and they wonder what Eros can't tell her and how she feels about it. And we'll also be looking at why Apollo heads to the mortal realm to find Artemis. We still don't know how Artemis really feels about finding the things that she might not want to hear or admit to herself regarding Persephone and Apollo. She's been hunting alone. We assume she's been hunting for several days.
Hold on. We'll be discussing Thanatos and Daphne traveling down to the mortal realm and talk about his experiences as the god of death. She also reminds him that she's a flower nymph, and because of that she has a shorter lifespan. Perhaps because he's so comfortable with her, he forgot. So instead of constantly being reminded, like he is with men. Apollo and Daphne run into each other, and Apollo is shot in front of her by Olympus. Is Daphne horrified to see Apollo because she knows that he must be angry? Mostly angry at her for bailing on the original date? Or is it purely the arrow of hatred or true nature that is scaring her in what she could be seeing? So,
cookie theories. Hera could be angry with Eros and Olympus because of the kiss, and she may not bless the marriage because she doesn't know Olympus is Psyche, and she has a grudge against love gods because Zeus blamed them for his sleeping around the pomegranate. And we're thinking about, did Hades take it for safekeeping? Because if the trial really goes badly, he might give Persephone the choice, because then she'd have diplomatic immunity. Or did Erebus give Persephone the pomegranate or persuade her to take it themselves?
Something else to consider, will Leto see that her son is losing control, or is at risk of exposing her plans? This week we're going to talk about the myth of Artemis and Apollo's birth story, their daughter and son of the Titaness Leto and the king of the gods. Hera, who was rightfully annoyed at her husband's infidelity, banned Leto seeking anywhere safe to give birth as a role of goddess of childbirth. Sometimes, in other versions of this myth, Hera's daughter is the goddess of childbirth instead, and Hera holds her basically to stop her from assisting Leto in any way. Leto's pregnancy was a dangerous and painful one due to this curse. She struggled to find shelter in order to give birth, and she was either transformed into a quail by Zeus, who pitied her, or she transformed herself. After 2 weeks of pain from needing to birth her children, Leto's firstborn was Artemis, goddess of the hunt, who assisted her mother in the birth of her brother. Because
of this, Artemis is seen as a goddess of childbirth or a protector of vulnerable women. For example, after stole sacred goats and cattle from Apollo, only being forgiven when Apollo had taken him to Mount Olympus to have High King Zeus hear the dispute. Ordered by Zeus, who was highly entertained by Hermes' wit and cheek with his charm and deception during the trial, told Hermes to show Apollo where his cattle were, and as he did so, showing him the rest of the animals are safe. Hermes then played the lyre for Apollo, and they became great friends, and Apollo claimed the lyre was worth more than 50 cows that he had owned. Hermes then gave Apollo the lyre as a gift, and Apollo wholly forgave Hermes for using the animal intestines as strings for his instrument. When Hades confident with Persephone, he starts showing her how he makes diamonds and plays golf on the roof, and he shows her all of his dogs. Those moments where she gave him confidence, he shows her his vulnerability and his powers, and then she does the same thing with her powers as well. But it's about confidence and trust, not just pure emotion, like with Zeus, when he burnt the crops. That was like pure, everyone has to respect me, I'm king of the gods, I'm arrogant, and I sort of have this anger, and he's using that sort of intense emotion to fuel his powers rather than like something like confidence. I mean, we've talked about Apollo, we've talked about Ampulus, we haven't talked about Minth, and we haven't talked about Thanatos and Daphne, because I think another character that we can't really help getting into when everyone thought, Hades will realize that Minth is horrible, but like he doesn't really believe he should deserve someone that's like better than Minth, because obviously he's had so much abuse that he just ends up going with someone like Daphne. And for someone as naive as Persephone, through Demeter's actions, she thinks, maybe this is somehow my fault that I attracted somebody like Apollo. And Hades feels the same way. He's like, she was nice to me when I bought her things, and, like, if I did stuff the way that she wanted, at least maybe she could be a good queen if I just bought her things and pretended to love her the way she wanted to be loved, because she wanted validation, and she wanted status, and that's not something she has as a nymph. I guess they're only slightly above mortal women, I suppose. At least in this world. Because she was with Hades, and that gave her a power trip, and then she was with Thanatos, and she was above him, or she thought she was above him, because he was in Hades' employ, but like really he's above her because he's a god and she's a nymph. So it's very power imbalance. It's okay. I was gonna say, I think that Minth did know about the hierarchy. I think that's why she was so resentful. Like, in the beginning, Hades was like, why are you like this? You weren't like this. Like, because, like, when we saw, he was kind of like, okay, I'll fire this person, I'll give you this job. I think she got hooked on the power because she was like, oh, I'm a nymph, he's a god, there's a big power difference, but he's giving me some power. That feels good, and he's giving me money, and that feels good. And she kind of got addicted to it, and then she was like, she almost became insecure because she realized, oh, there's a god, and there's a nymph, I'm not the same. But then she began to use that to her advantage. She was like, oh, I want to be seen with you. If you buy me this ugly purse, I want to be seen with you for this particular thing. It'll give me power, it'll give me status. and I have control over you. Whereas, like, I think Daphne knows about the hierarchy of gods and nymphs because she kind of experienced it with Apollo. He was like, if you do this for me, you can be seen with me. You know, I'm a great god and everyone worships me. You know, like, he even said it to Persephone. Like, he was like, oh, I don't consider you being a B-grade goddess a downgrade. And I think for Persephone versus, like, Daphne was like, you know, he probably sees me as, like, someone to boost his like, street cred almost, because she's, like, on Nymphstagram, and, like, he's attractive, and, like, everyone loves him, and he would have this sort of Instagram wife, and she's a nymph, and, like, you know, he would be above her. But, like, I think for her, like you said, because she's got such a short lifespan, she makes the most of what she has. She doesn't kind of get wrapped up in that power struggle. So she's like, oh, you know, like, I see this god as my equal because he respects me. And Thanatos does see from her point of view when they start dating, you know, like, she does have a shorter lifespan, but she makes him feel comfortable. In that way, they're emotionally equals, at least. It doesn't really matter about status for them. It isn't, like, endless. Like, the gods, I think, like, immortality sounded great until you have to leave, like, decades and decades, and you just get bored. Like, Hades was like, I started looking for a wife, but then the dating pool was, like, tiny, and then I just gave up. I just dedicated myself to decades and decades of working, because, you know, what else do you do with all, like, the all-amazing immortality that the mortals want is actually quite boring. Like, so for him, I just think he just kind of got into his head, like, oh, you know, Hades and Minth have everything, but I'm getting one off on Hades because I'm with Minth, and he doesn't know, and he does. But, like, it was kind of like he just resigned himself to being really, like, negative and pessimistic, because he was like, I'm gonna have eternity worth of this, like, all of this Hades thinking he's better than me, and I don't have to do anything because I'll just get Hermes to do it, and Minth treats me awfully, and, you know, nothing's gonna get better. It'll be like centuries and centuries of this. But, like, Daphne shows him that actually, like, his time is precious, even though he has, like, a finite amount of time, and she doesn't. It kind of makes him, like, definitely make the most of the time he has with her. Yeah. Yeah, like in that one panel where he's, like, wearing pajamas. And we're like, okay, that was sneaky. We didn't see that. Yeah, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Because, like, with the arrow, like, when Apollo gets shot, does that mean Daphne and Amberless see it? Like, what the arrow reveals? Or is she just, like, shocked because, oh my god, I hit a god. He could kill me because I'm a mortal disguised as a nymph. I'm not important. He's a god. And, also with Daphne, yeah, with Daphne, she's like, oh, it's Apollo, and then she's like, you know, I ditched him at a date, and he's cross. There's nothing to stop him from killing her, because she's a nymph and he's a god, and he would get punished, but again, he's supposed to be Zeus's favourite, so probably not that much, because, you know, it was like Eros said, you know, like, I went on a rampage, yeah, that was bad, but, like, Apollo and Artemis did a similar thing, and they were your favourites, they didn't get punished. And even Eros said it was like, oh, you punished your own grandson, like, power trip much. Because he's, again, highlighting that, oh, you know, Zeus has favourites. I mean, she's a famous nymph. Like, I think he likes watching her on television on, like, the pomegranate, like, lemonade thing. But I guess, I don't know, because, like, Zeus is kind of misogynistic in the fact that he sees, like, women as kind of, you're there to please me, I'm a god. And, like, that's why he has Thetis and Hera, and they fight, and he gets what he wants in the end, or he doesn't, and makes a big fuss about it, and then everyone's like, oh, how can we make Zeus happy? Yeah, I think, because in the original, like, didn't she say, oh, you know, like, it was kind of interesting when he began to take an interest in me, he would like some of her photos, and he'd be like, oh, you know, I like this person, like, even if they're a nymph, and she was, like, kind of, you know, surprised about it, and I don't think that she believed Persephone, not to be malicious, because, you know, they're friends, but, like, when somebody goes, oh, this guy is, like, absolute garbage, don't date him, like, you know, she might have thought Persephone was saying that because Apollo is well known, and some people always talk bad about famous people, just like they do Hades. But then, you know, when she saw, she was like, oh, he's terrible, or that when he went a little bit nuts on the date and started talking about Persephone and that weird haircut he wanted her to get, he was like, oh, he's, like, she was just like, oh, he's sketchy, he's behaving weirdly, I'm going to leave. And then she sees what he did and how he acts is fake and that he's really horrible. And she's like, oh, you know, everything's coming together now, and I don't know how I feel apart from horrified. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think Persephone looks up to her, because obviously they're sisters, and obviously they would have interacted. I don't know, maybe Daphne was, like, because she doesn't seem much older than Persephone, maybe, like, 20s. Like, the fact that they know each other, they must have been close, so, like, maybe Daphne was like, oh, I'm gonna go to the mortal realm, and then Persephone was thinking about it, and that's how she ended up. Inadvertently, Demeter enrolled her in the goddesses of eternal maidenhood or something, you know, because she wanted to be independent and go to Olympus, and Demeter's like, well, I can't keep you safe in Olympus, so I'll just do this because I think it's what's best for you. Whereas, like, Daphne's parents, like, we didn't meet them or anything, but, like, I think they were just like, oh, she's a nymph and she wants to make best with her life and she's confident and, you know, she knows what she wants, so she's safe, you know. But Demeter didn't see that. I think Demeter saw all the bad things that could happen because obviously she has trauma left over from the Great War, and she thinks that, you know, like, Persephone will end up a bit like she did, the young goddess that ends up being embroiled in something incredibly, like, traumatic and tragic, which is kind of bad because that is what happened. I mean, there are some bits about, like, will there be any punishment for Persephone and Demeter? Will... I mean, we've talked about Apollo, we've talked about Eros and Ampullus, we've talked about, I think we've talked about Artemis at length, Thanatos and Daphne, and the hate arrow. I think now we are talking about the trial, and, you know, will Hekate be Persephone's lawyer, because that's the first thing that happened was, you know, obviously Eros puts Persephone in Hades' car because of Aphrodite, and then, you know, the photographer takes pictures of Persephone, Hades loses it and rips out an eye, and the first thing that Hekate says after she's finished having fun watching a guy get his eyeball ripped out is, this is going to affect Persephone. You know, as a lawyer, you know, this is bad for the company because, you know, he took photos without permission, he was on your property without permission, but you've affected my 19-year-old friend who is a goddess, and obviously you are a god and a king, you have more of a standing than she does, this is going to hurt her, like, within the kind of, like, social hierarchy of, like, Olympus and the three kingdoms. And, like, that's the first time we saw her be a lawyer, you know, a sort of counsel, other than just being Hades' friend. Yeah, I think that, like, Hekate being a goddess of, like, the three paths and, like, that sort of thing, I think she knows to somewhat an extent. And also she knows Demeter because she went to the mortal realm to study poisonous plants. So she might have, like, got a glimpse maybe of, like, Persephone's future or her powers and just how powerful she was in, like, some sort of vision or something. But, like, she might not have thought anything of it because obviously she sees the past, the present, and the future. She has no way of determining which is which, so she knows that she has to kind of look out for Persephone almost, like an older sister or an aunt kind of a thing. But, like, as the company lawyer and Hades' friend type, I feel like if he was going to show the tapes, like, the audio tapes that he took about, you know, kind of admittance of like everything that pushed her over to the edge, like her first act of wrath. I think that he would show Hekate because she's his first and oldest friend and also his advisor, and she knows Persephone, so she's not going to immediately jump to conclusions like Zeus is. We haven't talked about the Leto side of it. Like, is she worried? Like, because she seems very suspicious. She's like, you were Zeus's favorite, now you're not because you messed up. Like, you kind of blew up at Zeus and was like, oh, mom says hi. Like, tipped him off, and he's got even more paranoid because Zeus is paranoid by nature, and we've seen that over pretty much since like Ares tried to flambe him for sleeping with Aphrodite, for punishing his own grandson. Like, we saw that, you know, the other gods could potentially, you know, overthrow Zeus, and I think he's very paranoid about it, like even his own children. Because I think in the original myths there was a prophecy that one of Zeus's sons would overthrow him, and it's mentioned in the webtoon, obviously. So he's thinking, oh, will it be Hephaestus? Because he was worried about Hephaestus coming to see Hera. I think he's very unsure of Apollo right now, like, because Apollo is a very kind of like, he pretends everything is okay, and that's kind of his front. But when from I think the moment where he's like, you know, he has that argument with Persephone and he's like not listening to her, and then Eros and Psyche burst through, but she's Amphilis on his back, and he's like, you know, you'll never love anyone again, I just have to loose this arrow, and he scratches his face, and like Apollo is absolutely convinced that there must be something wrong because she's the only sort of nymph or goddess or mortal woman that hasn't like thrown herself at him, and he's very obsessed with his image, and he thinks that he's like the most amazing god. So like, when I think from that point he became unhinged, and like it's gotten worse for him because, you know, his mother is now suspect that, you know, Zeus is not enamored with him as much as he used to be, and, you know, he's asking about Artemis a lot, and you know, he was obsessed with Persephone, and she went to see Persephone, and Persephone did not like Apollo. She, you know, practically said, you know, like, even if, you know, your son was the only god interested in me, I'd rather not have him, you know. And she's like, oh, she won't give herself to you willingly, you must have really dropped the ball on that one. Like, I think she's very old-fashioned as well, so she kind of expected Persephone to be like, oh, okay, it's my duty as a wife to be Apollo's. But then, you know, she's seen that Apollo does not, or has not told her the entire truth, and Persephone does not want to be with him. She sees through his kind of like, I'm amazing, look at me, you should be with me kind of thing. And you know, she sort of like, she raises her eyebrow at him, and she's like, well, you must have really messed up on this one, because she's enamored with Hades and you've fallen out with Zeus, and he's supposed to give you her as a wife, and Zeus said no. So, you know, does she think that he's at risk of exposing her plans, either with Kronos or to overthrow Zeus, or have him overthrow Zeus and then they'll work with Kronos, or just let him out for funsies because she's a Titaness and I guess she could do that. I definitely think it's power related, because like, even though Apollo's like the younger twin, like in Greek mythology, if you had a son and a daughter, the son was worth more than the daughter, because if she were to be married off, she'd have a dowry and like the son wouldn't. And that when you married someone in ancient Greece, like everything that belonged to their family went towards the husband as a present to go with the wife. So basically, if you only had daughters, you had basically nothing. Unless you had sons, in which you could gain, like, business deals, like, with, Psyche. Or you could gain, like, fame and, like, more grandchildren and, like, potentially grandsons and things like that. So when it comes to Leto treating Apollo as, like, the most amazing thing to happen to her is because he's a son, and because he's potentially the son of Zeus, which is more than likely, but people are thinking, you know, is Leto trying to manipulate Zeus? Is that why, Apollo goes over and he's like, oh, Mum said hi, but is, like, Leto is definitely his mother, but are we 100% sure that he's the son of Zeus? Because people have been like, oh, he's purple, but that doesn't mean anything. Did Leto just convince, you know, Zeus that he's his son? But then I think there was that massive moment where everyone was like, oh, you know, because Hekate was like, oh, you know, Hephaestus doesn't want to rule and Ares is too dumb. And then the next panel we saw was Tower Block and everything, and then we saw Apollo. And everyone was like, oh my god, it's gonna be him! So, will Leto be like, oh, you know, you're at risk of exposing my plans, like, I'm gonna, like, not allow you to go to Zeus, or I'll smooth it over with Zeus, or I'll do something, because you've messed up too much? Or, you know, like, could she just go along with it and have, like, I don't know, like, maybe she allows Kronos to eat Apollo or something, you know, like, that would at least have him, like, punished for eternity. Or, like, yeah, because he's obsessed with fertility as well. Because I think that's what woke him up, was the fertility powers from the tree. And obviously he might have been, like, dormant since his wife. We don't know what happened to Rhea. People were like, maybe she failed, like, she sort of, like, faded out of like, existence, because if they don't believe in, like, a god, maybe they fade. But, like, Kronos' powers were over fertility as well. Like, in the myths, he was kind of, like, sort of a little bit like Demeter's power, which is funny because she was the one to sort of, like, have the best hand in, like, defeating him. He thought of her as, like, a daughter in the original myths and was like, oh, I'm going to give her, like, some of my power over, like, the fertility of the crops, and therefore she's better than the mortals because she can control whether they live or die. And then she was the ultimate betrayal for him because she helped defeat him with his sons. So, like, is Zeus as paranoid about his sons as, you know, Kronos was? Because, you know, Kronos knew that, like, by his second child that the third would overthrow him, or one of his sons would overthrow him, which is why he ate Hades and Poseidon and then a rock, which was supposed to be Zeus. And they eventually overthrow him, and I think it might be almost hereditary that there's a constant overthrow of son to father to son. And then, like, I think even when Hades said, oh, you know, he went a bit mad with power, but I think he was good once. Is that also a hereditary thing? Is Zeus getting more and more paranoid because that's what's happening to him? Is that happening to Apollo? Is he becoming unstable because he wants to overthrow his father and have power? You mean, like, does he want power, or has he been told that that's his right by Leto? Does she want the power for herself, or... I mean, because he already has fame. He has, like, temples. He has, like, offerings. He has, like, fame. He has, like, that following. Like, does he want power at all? Like, does he have enough, or has he just been told that, you know, since he's the golden child and the son, and that it's his birthright to have his father's power, but does he want... He's been kind of told this is what he's entitled to, but does he actually want it? Because at the moment he's kind of, like, spiraling, so, you know, like, what power does he already hold if people realize, oh, he's crazy? And, like, with Leto, will she just, like, feed him to Kronos, or double-cross him? Or, you know, cut her losses and be like, you know, he's crazy. Or does she kind of drive another wedge between Zeus and be like, oh, Apollo and Artemis are Zeus's children. Apollo is... you know, has the rights to the throne, and, you know, technically Hera and Hebe and, you know, none of them can do anything, because in Greek society a son was a powerful thing already. And I think Leto was trying to drive a wedge between you know, herself and Hera, because they were close in the beginning, but then even Eros tells Ampullus as Psyche that, you know, she's a social pariah. She was outcast because of Zeus. And that's partly the reason why, you know, Hera doesn't like love gods. Because I think perhaps he convinced Hera that Aphrodite was something to do with him falling in love with Leto. Or something like that. That would make sense. That they're not allowed to use their powers on, like, other gods because of that great divide between Leto and Hera. And then that would start the whole Hera cheating on Zeus with her brother-in-law, which is Hades. I mean, the Greek family, like of the gods, like, it's just a mess. It's a total mess. I mean, because technically we haven't seen all of Zeus's children, like, not his mortal ones. Because obviously Dionysus hasn't been born yet, but we know that his mother is in the comic. Which is his current mortal girlfriend, the one that wanted to set fire to the loom, and that's when Hades found the dog. Like, he was just like, oh, that's Semele, my current mortal girlfriend, or I think Poseidon was like, oh, that's Semele, you know, Zeus's mortal girlfriend, and everyone was like, oh, that's the mother of Dionysus, the god of parties and wine. Totally makes sense that he would be Zeus's son, because, you know, that he likes going to bars with mermaids and flirting with his secretary and parties. But also, like, in myth, I think Zeus has, like, other sons. I think he has, like, a daughter that's Ares' twin, and she's, like, the goddess of chaos or something like that, and then he has a son, but I don't think he'd be much interested in, because he's just interested in, like, kind of like the chaos of everything. And then we have, like, Eris, which is the goddess of chaos and kind of like punishment and stuff. She just kind of, I think she thrives off her parents, like, fighting. We don't see her, but, like, she's alluded to by Hera. Hera's just like, for Hebe, she's like, oh, go get your lazy sister's butt out of bed. So we don't know if she's talking about Eleutheria, which is the goddess of maidenhood, or like the goddess of, I guess, Hera is the goddess of like maidenhood, and also Athena is the daughter of Zeus, but like technically she's the daughter of Metis, which is Hera's mother. Yeah, and like I don't think she's interested in Zeus's power. She has knowledge, and that's power enough for her. And I think as part of the goddess of eternal maidenhood and the goddess of wisdom, she's incredibly wise. She has power enough. You know, she helps Ares with the tactical side of wars. For her, I think she has all the power she needs. She's also Zeus's favourite, which is strange because, you know, she's not a son. Athena's knowledge to him is like an ally of power that he can use against others if he has to. So I don't think he's worried about her overthrowing him in any way into his power, like that, his control. I think, you know, I don't know if we're going to see any of the other children, like, yet or anything. I think it's between the three. It's Hephaestus, I think it's Ares, and I think it's Apollo. It seems to be threes. So we have, you know, the three sons of Kronos and Rhea, and we have the three contenders for the throne against Zeus. We have three again. We've got Demeter and Persephone, and we've got Hades. And then in the myths, they have three famous children, which is Melina, the goddess of nightmares and punishment, and then you have Pluton, which is the I guess he's kind of the god version of like harvest, but then Zeus punishes him and he's blind. So his sister Icaria, which is another goddess, kind of similar to her sister in dreams, but I think she wanted to be a little bit like wealth in other senses. So like bounty and crops are considered a wealth to people that don't have it. So I think she ends up helping her brother, but actually it's more than three. It's just the three famous ones that we know of. Because in original myths, like, yeah, Hades has a lot of children. He does, because he has a Spitarian who was exactly like her mother, who Aphrodite got jealous of.
That was the other thing I was gonna ask about, was what your thoughts were in terms of what are Leto's plans. You know, there's been so many questions about what are her plans? What is she actually thinking, and why? How does Artemis, and more specifically Apollo, fit into this plan? Do you honestly think that what Apollo wants is power? You know, so here's an interesting thing to think about. So, who falls into the category of Zeus's available sons? There's Hephaestus, there's Ares, and then there's potentially Apollo. And out of the three of those, you know, do any of them seem like they would be interested in having the kind of power that Zeus has? The only one in my opinion would maybe be Apollo, but if I'm very honest, I don't know if I feel like he wants, which is what he seems to want, admiration. It doesn't seem like it, but he may not really.